He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Kia ora, Claire here. Delighted to be able to give you some bonus Kākāpō content this week. If you haven't already listened to the episode, A Year of Mainland Kākāpō, then I recommend you pause this, listen to that, and then come back. If you've listened, well, in making that episode, I had a long chat with a member of DOC's Kākāpō recovery team about the Kākāpō and Maunga Tautari, but about other Kākāpō things too. Here's that interview.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Andrew Digby ahau, ko te kaitohu tohu pūteo o Kākāpō me tākehei o te papa atawhai e mahi ana. So I am Andrew Digby and I'm the science advisor for Kākāpō and tākehei at te papa atawhai, the Department of Conservation.
And what I just realised when I was doing a bit of reading this morning is that you're actually double Dr. Andrew Digby. So you've got a PhD in astronomy and conservation biology.
Yeah, that's right. It makes me seem very indecisive, but yeah, I kind of switched careers later in life. Yeah,
what a
but
combo.
I'm still a bit of a nocturnal focus with Kākāpō and astronomy. But yeah,
I was just thinking it must be amazing to be on those offshore predator-free islands where there's not much light pollution and you're looking for birds at night, but there's also heaps of stars in the sky. It must really tick all the boxes for you.
Yeah, I've had some pretty amazing experiences, like on Anchor a couple of years ago, just out doing nest work in the Kākāpō breeding season. There was an aurora going. The stars were absolutely amazing. So it's like, yeah, that definitely ticked all the boxes. That was pretty cool.
So you've been working with the Kākāpō recovery program for quite some time. How many years now?
Yeah, so it's just over 10 years now with Kākāpō and Tākehei, yeah.
And how many Kākāpō were there 10 years ago when you started?
When I started, there was around about 125 Kākāpō, actually maybe slightly less than that. That was in the start of 2016. So yeah, so we're kind of just about doubled in that time. We've had these 3 really big breeding seasons, which has done wonders for the Kākāpō population.
So what's the number that we're at now?
So we're at 247 today.
And those 247 Kākāpō, where are they?
So they're in a mix of places. The bulk of them are on our 2 main breeding islands of Whenua or Codfish Island, which is off the coast of Rakiura, Stewart Island, and on Anchor Island, which is in Dusky Sound. And we also have another southern breeding island of Te Kākāpō, which is Chalky Island. That's kind of a little bit further south down the coast. And that's quite a new breeding site for us. We have some Kākāpōs on Hoturu or Toi, so Little Barrier Island. And then we have a couple of other populations. So Pearl Island, which is down off the coast of Rakiura, right down the southern end near Port Pegasus. Also Maunga Tautari in the Waikato. And we have actually a new Kākāpō population on Coal Island, which is the southernmost island in Fiordland, right down at the far tip.
And that was the most recent translocation, right? Was to Coal Island?
Yeah, that was. Yeah, we've got 4 Kākāpō there. It's kind of a bit of a trial to try and see how they do there. And we're looking to, if that goes well, to release more Kākāpō there, hopefully next month.
And I guess that's the stage you're at with some of these new locations that you're putting Kākāpō into. It's kind of trial. It's trial time.
Yeah, it very much is. So we really have had this problem, this nice problem with Kākāpō, in that the population has grown very quickly, and it's growing quicker than we expected. We didn't expect to have so many big breeding seasons in succession. We had one in 2016, and then one in 2019, and then one in 2022, kind of all record breaking in their own way. So the population's grown very quickly. So we've rapidly run out of space, and those southern breeding islands, particularly of Whenua and Anchor Island, are full. So we've needed find new places to put Kākāpō. But the problem is that we kind of had run out of room. Like all the obvious sites for Kākāpō had been used, and the other ones were, ideally just not suitable. So we had to kind of look around and find what other places might be suitable. And Coal and Maunga Tautari are 2 of those sites. There's, I guess, not necessarily difficulties, but some complications with those sites. And so, yeah, that's why they hadn't been chosen before. But potentially, and they've got really good habitat for Kākāpō. So, yeah, we're keen to try them. But we have probably been forced into it a little bit earlier than we had expected initially because of this rapid expansion of the population.
How much space does a Kākāpō need? Yeah,
that's a really good question. And that's something that we're working out. Typically in some of the early habitat in like Fiordland and Rakiura, they might have had 50 hectares per individual. But we know that on some of our islands currently, like Whenua, they can get down to about 15 hectares per Kākāpō. So it kind of varies round about that, sort of round about 20 to 30 hectares per Kākāpō is what we think of, but it's very much habitat dependent.
And when you run out of space, I mean, what happens? What do you push up against? Is it like the lack of food to share, or do they start squabbling, or, what's the issue when you've got too many Kākāpō in one place?
It's both of those things. So one of the issues that we have is lack of suitable nesting habitat for females, or a sufficient habitat for them to be able to support offspring. So they need to be able to have enough rimu trees, for example, to be able to feed their young. And the other thing that happens is that the males fight. So when they're up at their display sites, at their track and bowl systems, they'll fight amongst each other. They will kill each other sometimes. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen too often. But we do have this issue that we don't actually know what's normal with Kākāpō very well. Like some of the best information that we have is from Richard Henry's writings, 140 years ago. So what he found in Fiordland. But otherwise, we have Kākāpō now in this kind of false situation on these often these offshore islands where Kākāpō didn't used to exist, and we just don't know really what are natural densities. So we're kind of feeling our way for a little bit. We don't really know what a natural sex ratio is, for example, Kākāpō. Do we want 50-50, or do we want a lot more females? And we've done some work recently which suggested actually having more females might be a better thing for Kākāpō, and fewer males, a higher density of females, might actually increase fertility. So we're definitely still in the learning phase for what's optimal.
Right, and that that's a difficulty, right? Because you don't know what it should be, but we do know that Kākāpō once used to be widespread across Aotearoa, right?
Yeah, and they used to be really, really common in some places too. Like Richard Henry talks about finding 100 Kākāpō in a mile, for example. And, he'll sometimes moan he'll only catch 8 Kākāpō in a day, sort of thing. And so, that sort of scale of things is quite different to what we know now. So we suspect that they were in very, very high densities in certain areas. And we do have some fossil records to go by, for example, and some from coprolites to understand what they were feeding on and where they were living, that sort of thing too. But yeah, we don't know a whole lot about what is normal for Kākāpō.
In terms of what we do know about habitat, for the southern breeding populations of Kākāpō, the rimu is really important. But, do you expect that they would have been across many different kinds of forest habitat in New Zealand?
Yeah, we know that Kākāpō used to live right throughout the whole country from the north to the south. And rimu isn't found in a lot of those places, especially up north. And so we know that they must have been breeding in response to other species. So, for example, Mangatau, for example, in the Waikato, we know that Kākāpō used to live there. There is rimu there, but it's not anything like the densities you get in the south. So it's highly likely that they would have been breeding in response to other tree species. And the same within Fiordland, where there's vast amounts of beech forest, and the indications are that they were probably breeding in response to beech masts. They might have been using tussock as well, so tussock masts might have been important, but we just don't see that in modern Kākāpō. We've only ever seen them nesting in response to rimu. So that's a challenge for us, is to understand, we want to have Kākāpō in more places. We need them to be not just in the south of the south. We need to put them into other places and ultimately we want to restore them to the mainland, to where they used to be. So understanding this is quite important.
Okay, so now I just want to narrow in to talk a little bit more about Mangatau, but I also wanted to ask you, Andrew, about the trial in Hoturo Toi, because it's, the opposite end of the country and a very different habitat. And so how has that been going? Because I know there's still some Kākāpō there, but a lot of them were moved back down south last year, right?
Yeah, that's right. And we are actually looking to move Kākāpō off of Hoturu completely later this year. So that's not a permanent move. That's kind of a temporary move, at least to be able to support the southern populations. One of the things that we've been doing, the point of Hoturu is that there has been a trial to understand if Kākāpō can breed there without the support that we give them down south, and especially without the supplementary feeding that we do during breeding seasons. And what we've been able to establish since 2012 is that that's not really possible there. Their productivity is very low without that supplementary feeding. And we know with supplementary feeding, they can do okay there. They bred okay in the 1990s. But that's not the model that we need to go to with Kākāpō. We're looking to step back more. We don't want to get more sites with intensive management. And Hautu is quite a very difficult site. It's very large. It's very rugged. And so we can't really support intensive management there. So that's what we've been trying to do, is to understand whether that they can cope there and breed there well without intensive management. And the answer seems to be that they can't really breed very well. They can live perfectly well, and Hautu will remain to be a potentially important site for Kākāpō in the future. It's one of only 2 sites where stoats can't swim to, so for example, so it's a real good sort of safe spot for Kākāpō. But for the time being, we're going to return those breeding birds south so they can form part of the breeding population in south of New Zealand, and then contribute to the population that way.
Because I guess this gets to the ultimate point, which is you're not just trying to find places where Kākāpō can be safe. You're trying to find places where Kākāpō can live and thrive and breed independently of this intensive management that's happening at the moment in the southern breeding sites.
Exactly, that's right. That's the model that we really want to get to. So we kind of do these trials as a 2-step process, really. First of all, we'll put Kākāpō there to see if they can live okay and just actually survive and maintain a healthy weight, for example. And then the next stage is, will they actually breed there? And that's kind of the critical bit. And in future, we need more breeding sites for Kākāpō. That's what's important. There's probably quite a few sites where we can put Kākāpō and they will live there okay, but not necessarily breed. But it's the breeding sites is what we need.
And so in terms of Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari, where Kākāpō were translocated this time last year, late July 2023, that was kind of that first stage. So you're not looking at breeding, these guys, these male Kākāpō that you translocated in here, they're kind of not very important in terms of the breeding population. And it was the trial to see how they would get on in a fenced eco-sanctuary in the mainland.
Yes, that's right. So I guess there was a number of kind of firsts there. One is moving them up to the mainland in the North Island as well. That was kind of quite a big step, and inside a fenced sanctuary. So that was key. And as I said earlier, we know that Kākāpō used to live there, but so it's just understanding can this modern population live there, and will they be able to sort of perhaps have some breeding behaviour, and then we'll have Kākāpō breeding there in future. So that's kind of the aims of the trial. But the first step is moving males there. And as you say, we tend to move the males, which have got a lower genetic value. They're not quite as critical as some of the other birds. So we put them there to start off with to see how they do.
How was the decision made to move them to Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari? I mean, was it based on that, we've got so many Kākāpō and we need to try and find more space for them?
Yeah, it was. It was quite a long process. We've been talking about moving Kākāpō there for at least 15 years. And so it's been a long time coming. It hasn't just been a snap decision. Maungatautari has some amazing forest habitat. It's incredible ecosystem up there. It kind of looks and feels like it's really, really good for Kākāpō. So, we know the forest health and since it's fenced and is, pest-free, that's ideal for Kākāpō in that respect. So that was kind of quite an easy decision from a habitat point of view. The tricky bits were A, the fence, and B, the breeding. There was Rimu there, but it's about 100th of the density on Whenuaho. So, it's likely that if they did breed, it would not be in response to Rimu in general, or maybe like 1 or 2 birds might pick up on a few Rimu trees, but it was understanding what they might breed in response to. So there were the 2 questions, the fence and the breeding.
And the fence, it turns out, is a big question. And I know that there was some adjustments made to the fence before the birds were moved in, but there was also a trial with the birds down south and a fence to see how they would interact.
Yeah, that's right. We actually had a few trials down on Whenuaho to understand Kākāpō in a fence space. We'd had Kākāpō in small enclosures before, but never anything on that scale with that type of fence. So we wanted to understand, would Kākāpō climb out of that fence, because these fence sanctuaries were designed to keep pest animals out. They weren't designed to keep anything in. So we'd never had this situation before of how to keep something in there. And they've actually been built to allow things to climb out. We want, say, for example, if a weasel gets in, we want it to be able to get out easily enough. So they were built with a hood on the outside, but not on the inside, for example. So they were the trials that we did, was to understand, could Kākāpō climb that fence? And if so, what would we do about it?
And since the birds have moved to the sanctuary, there's been a number of incidents.
Yeah, so the design we came up with actually was a baffle on the inside of the fence, like basically a tin barrier, and our trials showed that Kākāpō would not climb that barrier, so that's fine. We've actually done some trials recently, which we're pretty confident that Kākāpō are not actually climbing the fence. But what they seem to be doing is using vegetation to get over. And we have had some escapes. So we had the first escape in September last year, and I think we were up to 14 escapes since then. But that's from 6 individuals. So some of those are repeat offenders. And that has surprised us. We actually thought that some of the Kākāpō would not even encounter the fence necessarily. They would just live in their small area of the mountain. Like, this is a 3,000 hectare fence sanctuary. Is absolutely massive. It can fit 2 whenua hose inside of it. So, there wasn't that much reason to expect that they would spend a lot of time at the fence, but some of them certainly have been. They've been moving around quite a lot. So, yeah, there's been a few things that have surprised us. One is that they got out, and the other thing is just how much they've been moving around.
Yeah, you must be tearing your hair out. Like, there's so much good forest. Just stay in the middle.
Yeah, that's right. And some of them did, and then they kind of moved. And that's one of the things which is really interesting about this, is that, the movement patterns have been quite different to what we've known on other islands. And it's also shown up, some of the things we always think we know quite a lot about Kākāpō, but they always surprise us. Every time we do something a little bit different, there's always something. And this has been a real good learning experience for us. It's been absolutely fascinating to see what's been going on up there. And it's quite important because we want to increase Kākāpō habitat. We want to have them in more places around the motu. And so, this is it's a key learning experience. We could just, stuff Kākāpō onto whenua and Pukenui onto Anchor Island and just, leave them there and just let those populations grow and grow and grow. But, we really need to branch out and take a few risks and make a few moves like this to understand more about what Kākāpō need and where they can live.
And I guess a thing that you can't know for certain, but it would be really nice to be able to ask the Kākāpō is why? Why are they roaming so much, and why are they, using, as you say, using the vegetation to get over the fence? Like, why are they leaving or trying to leave this area?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think this has thrown up 2 things for us. One is the how are they getting out? And the other thing, as you mentioned, is the why are they getting out? And it's the why for me that's most important and most interesting. And when you're up there and you see this beautiful forest, and then there's a fence, and outside it is just grass. It's like, as a Kākāpō, why would you do that? And that's one of the things that we've been working to understand. And one advantage that we have had is that we've had GPS trackers on these Kākāpō, so we can get really good movement patterns. And so I'm still in the process of analysing those data to try and understand what's going on, exactly how they're moving, what are they selecting for. There definitely does seem to be some sort of temporal aspect to it. So they're not all just moving all the time. They're kind of at certain times of the year, it seems like they're moving more. So it may be some sort of breeding behavior which is triggering them to do that. And they're spending quite a lot of time on the fence, which is interesting to us. And we don't quite know why, whether they're actually trying to get out. But it's from our observations, it seems like they're not necessarily trying to get out over the fence. But it may be that some of the habitat there they quite like. And one thing we've picked up on, for example, is that they seem to really like blackberry. They're spending a lot of time in blackberry. And we had one individual which probably spent 2 months in a single blackberry patch, which we don't see that sort of behavior in anywhere else so far. And we haven't actually had Kākāpō with blackberry before. Like, as far as I know, Kākāpō have never seen blackberry, so they actually seem to be really keen on it. So it might be some sort of interesting quirk like that as well. Actually, they just like some of the habitat near the fence, and they accidentally climb over sometimes without actually meaning to. We'd certainly know the first Kākāpō that escaped spent quite a bit of time trying to get back in. So that was interesting. But other birds that have escaped have kind of made a beeline and headed straight away from the sanctuary too. So yeah, there's not a clear, consistent picture.
The blackberry, was that during the time when the blackberries were fruiting?
Interestingly, it wasn't. So yeah, it was kind of October, November time. So maybe they're eating the shoots or something. Yeah, it's we do know that they have been eating the fruit, and one thing that we're working on is doing some diet analysis as well to understand about what the birds up there are eating. But the blackberry is definitely an attractant.
That's funny, isn't it? It's like all of this. It's a bold new world for the Kākāpō, like fences and blackberries and different things that they're coming across.
Yeah, there's these exotic species. You get some grasses and that around the fence too, which is a greater mix of vegetation at the fence line than you get further inside the forest too. So maybe that's an issue, something as well that they're just picking up on. And we know that, for example, Kākāpō do feed on grasses, so maybe they're trying out some of those foods too. And yeah, maybe they prefer that sort of that edge habitat, which is not what we've seen elsewhere. But then we've never really had Kākāpō in this sort of situation before.
You mentioned the GPS tags there. So these are new tags that you're putting on them so that you can get kind of more specific location data?
Yeah, that's right. So one of the things that we've actually been trialing for a number of years now is GPS to get quite accurate location information. We have been trialing GPS where it's not a remote download GPS. You have to catch the Kākāpō to get the data back. So that's what we've been using, and that's where we've been getting this information from. And that's been really useful on other Kākāpō islands and at Mangatautari too, to understand, because Kākāpō are really hard to track. They're really hard to follow. And so previous studies have tried to look at Kākāpō using radio telemetry. So someone walking around with an aerial at night trying to triangulate where the Kākāpō is, it's very difficult. But with GPS, you can get accuracy within 10, 20 meters or something. You can do that many, many times a night. And it's showing us some fascinating behavior. And it's showing us a lot of stuff that we never knew was happening before. So we've had Kākāpō, going to places and moving around a lot more than we thought they were actually doing. We just didn't know. So the GPS has provided some real interesting insights into Kākāpō behaviour, both on the islands and at Mangatautari too.
Sorry, just to clarify, Andrew, so these are GPS where you do have to catch the bird and then download the data?
Yes, that's right. That's what we've been using traditionally, although we are in the process and we have been using this year some remote download GPS on Kākāpō Mangatautari because we wanted more live information, so to be able to detect escapes. So that's something that we're working on, and we've basically got a small GPS, remote download GPS, which we're putting on the Kākāpō there. We're now working with the manufacturers to make a bigger version, so the battery will last longer. But that's actually been really useful in helping us detect some of these escapes. It's basically just works through the cell phone networks or Kākāpō escapes, and it will send a signal, and we can see a near live map of where it is, and then go and retrieve it.
Right, because I read this in the May 2024 newsletter, and that there was a recent escapee, and basically you just kind of check the GPS and you're like, oh, we'll go and pick him up.
Yeah, that's right. And some of these tags, they have like a geofence option as well, where you can get an alert basically when the GPS tag moves out of certain areas. So it's ideal for this sort of thing. We haven't had to use this in other sites before because they've been on islands with sea around them and they can't escape. And also where there's no 4G signal, no cell phone signal as well. But at Mangatautari, it's been sort of pushing us to investigate some of the other uses for this sort of technology, and that's been really, really helpful here.
So what's next in terms of the trials and investigation in Sanctuary Mountain Mangatautari? Because I know a lot of the birds now have been translocated away. There's still 4 birds that are there, and what are the next steps to kind of learn more?
Yeah, so there's actually now 3 birds there. We actually moved one off last month in June. So we have 3 individuals left. The others have all gone south. And the reason for that is because just to make them monitoring a bit more manageable. With 10 birds up there like we originally had, that's a lot of work to try and keep tabs on all of them. So that's why we have a smaller number. But we're keen to commit to this trial basically to learn more about it, because we know we've just had a year and we've still got a lot more that we want to find out. We've just recently done a fence trial up there to understand how they might be escaping. That's a really important learning for us. We really want to try and look what happens over time. Maybe these birds will settle down a lot more with time, or maybe they will continue to have these seasonal movements. So yeah, that's kind of really important information that we want to learn, plus, what they're eating and how they go in general within a fence sanctuary, because the fence sanctuaries are important for Kākāpō, and they could still play a pretty important role into the future. So we really want to understand, how they can support a Kākāpō population and how Kākāpō do at Mangatautari too. So yeah, we're committed to continuing this trial just with a smaller number of individuals.
So who are the individuals that remain there?
We have Bunker, Taetanga, and Tautahi. There was a bird called Otipoti, but he's been moved south now.
And when you mention a fence trial there, so is that a fence within the fence?
Yeah, that's right. So we set up a fence within the fence, mocking up the real fence, and we had like someone observing, we had cameras on to see how they would get out. We're actually still in the process of analysing those results at the moment, but early indications are is that they do not climb the fence, but they're potentially using vegetation to get out over the fence. And, there's been a lot of work done up there to try and trim back that vegetation to make it so that the Kākāpō have fewer options to do that. But it's a very long fence and very quickly up there too. So that's, definitely an ongoing challenge.
Right. So they've been clearing kind of inside the fence to make sure there's nothing overhanging. But as you say, big fenced area, lots of vegetation.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so it seems like they might be using vegetation to get up onto the hood of the fence, potentially. Sometimes they might possibly be using like a bridge to get over, so from a tree outside the fence to a tree inside the fence, for example. And the team up there have been working really hard to reduce those opportunities. And we have had, a lot fewer escapes in recent months, and so we're hopeful that they'll settle down. And what I ideally would love to happen is the Kākāpō just to settle down in their 20 to 30 hectare home range away from the fence and just happily live there and not test out the fence too often. So it's still very much, we've still got a lot to learn, and we're still really keen to understand more. And so our plan is to keep them there.
And a bit of supplementary feeding now as well to kind of encourage them to stay within the fence?
Yeah, that's right. So that's kind of a temporary measure. We don't want this to be an intensively managed site. So we don't want to do supplementary feeding in the long term, but this is to help anchor them. And certainly, at least for one of the individuals, that does seem to be working quite well. He's set up quite a long way, right up near the summit, actually. And so, he's quite settled there. So that's something that would then hopefully wean the birds off over time. And so we don't want to permanently supplementary feed them, but that's just to try and keep them in one spot for a little while.
And as you say, it's, early days, it's a year in. Does the hope still exist that there could be a breeding population within a fenced eco-sanctuary?
Yeah, we would like that. Yes, we think fenced sanctuaries still have a role to play. There's the goal of predator-free 2050 and having vast areas unfenced, but I think fenced sanctuaries have got an important, at least interim role in that. And one of the issues that we have with Kākāpō is that they need quite a lot of space. So a lot of the fenced sanctuaries, say for example, Zealandia, an amazing fenced sanctuary, but it's too small to keep a population of Kākāpō. You could only really get a few Kākāpō there, and it's not a viable population. But with Mangatautari, it's so big that you could easily have a breeding population of Kākāpō there in terms of space. So if we can keep them in, and if they show signs of breeding behaviour, then it's certainly potential. And any other large fenced sanctuary as well, as long as it's big enough. We could have Kākāpō there.
And, it sounds very much like the decisions are made based on what's going to be best for the Kākāpō and trying to find those spaces and those areas where they might be able to breed in the future. But does there was a lot of media around the release of the Kākāpō into Sanctuary Mountain Mangatautari last year, because it is this mainland sanctuary. The majority of us don't get to offshore predator islands where these Kākāpō are. Does that come into it, that there's a greater awareness there for people that these birds are returning, and that there's this opportunity that people might actually come across them?
Yeah, that is a key part of it. So we want what's best for the Kākāpō, but also what is best for the Kākāpō is that people know about them and care about them. And part of that is bringing Kākāpō back to where people can not necessarily see them. Like you'll never go to Mangatautari and see a Kākāpō, but you'll know that they're there. You might see sign of them. One day, you might be somewhere at night and might be able to hear a Kākāpō. So that's really, really important to us, is to returning. We want to return Kākāpō to the mainland. We want to restore the modi of the Kākāpō. We want to for them to live where they used to live, and just getting people to know that they can go somewhere on that they can just drive in their car for an hour or 2 hours from Auckland and be in Kākāpō habitat I think is pretty cool. And one of the issues, as you point out, is that we have had with Kākāpō is that they kind of have been locked up on these offshore sanctuary islands, for their own good. But it's very, very difficult for people to get to experience where they live. And we know people love Kākāpō. I'm always blown away by how many people just absolutely love Kākāpō, not just from New Zealand, but from around the world. And so that's pretty cool. So that is a really important factor as part of that, is to get people to be able to go where Kākāpō live.
Yeah. as an aside, Dan had this cool story about a family who were in Sanctuary Mountain Mangatautari when they were doing a health check on a Kākāpō. So they were just strolling along the path, and then all of a sudden they came across and they were able to see this Kākāpō in the sanctuary, like right there in front of them. Yeah, which would be an amazing experience if we were just going for a stroll.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you never know what those sort of things can trigger as well, especially in kids too. And one of the things that really struck me is when we released Kākāpō there last July, we had quite a crowd of people for the release. We had a lot of school children there, so local iwi, local school children. And the thing was, when we pulled the Kākāpō from its box and basically to put it into a bag to transfer it, and everyone saw the Kākāpō for the first time, and there was this collective intake of breath. Everyone just went like this, it was completely unscripted. It just really showed that the impact that these birds have, and when people see them. So yeah, that really struck home with me, just how important it is that people get to experience them.
So we've been talking a lot about spaces for breeding populations. When is the next breeding season predicted to be?
Good question. We think it's probably going to be 2026. So we'll kind of have nesting January 2026. That's our initial prediction. We base that on temperature differences between one year and the next, and it's looking like 2026 could be quite a significant year for Kākāpō. There's a very small chance that Kākāpō could breed on whenua next year, but if they do, it would be a very small scale, maybe just a few individuals. So it's probably not going to happen, but we can't exactly rule it out. So we have a way of predicting. Basically, we get a 2-year warning based on temperatures and looking at temperature differences, and then we count the fruit developing on the rimu trees, and that gives us a 1-year warning. So we're currently at the 2-year stage for 2026, and we'll know more around about April next year about whether there will be one. But that's kind of what we're gearing up to at the moment, and it's looking like it could be breeding on all 3 of the southern breeding islands, so on Whenua, on Anchor, and on Te Kākāpō. So yeah, it could be a very potentially big year, and it's exciting for us. It's exciting for a couple of reasons. One is we make more Kākāpō. That's cool. For me, the most exciting thing is what we learn and how we develop our management. So we're on a real mission to try and step back and make Kākāpō management less intensive. They're one of the most intensively managed species in the world. We don't want that. We want them just to be living as naturally as possible. And those breeding seasons give us a real chance to do that. So we've got a few ideas of how to step back even more next time. And just leave them to do their own thing a bit, which is risky. But as the population grows, we're able to take more risks like that. And we need to, because we've got more Kākāpō to manage. And we haven't got, our number of people doesn't increase in line with the number of Kākāpō to manage. So we need to put less effort per bird. And so that's one thing that we're working on. And we rely pretty heavily on the technology to help us to do that.
So in between now and that predicted large breeding season in 2026, because this is, you predict the breeding season based on the rimu mast, so when the rimu trees are going to fruit, and if you've got a big mast, then you have a big breeding season, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we don't know for sure that it's going to be a big mast in 2026 yet. We know there's a big temperature difference. There's not necessarily a direct correlation between a big temperature difference and a big mast, but we suspect it might be, and we will know more next year about how big that mast will be. So we will count the fruit on the trees developing next March. So by April we should know. But it will be a 4-year gap between breeding seasons if it's 2026, which is quite unusual. So yeah, they'll kind of be due for breeding. They should be ready.
Can you just explain the temperature difference that you were saying? Now you're looking at the temperature difference?
We look at the temperature difference between, say, summer 1 and summer 2. If summer 2 is quite a lot colder than summer 1, then in summer 4, we'll have a rimu mast. So it's like a 4-year cycle. And so, for example, in this year, in 2024, we had quite a cold summer, whereas in 2023, we had a hot summer. So we've gone from hot to cold, and it means 2 years later, which is 2026, we expect a rimu mast. So that's kind of the model that we've come up with. And it's worked actually remarkably well throughout the sites that we have. And so that's how we predict get a 2-year heads up, which is really good actually, because when you have a species which doesn't breed every year, it's really useful to be able to predict when it does breed. And so, for example, accounting cycles, financial cycles work on an annual basis, but Kākāpō don't do that, which makes things a bit tricky. So yeah, at least being able to know in advance when we think they will breed is really useful.
And between now and then, what is the Kākāpō recovery team busy doing?
Yeah, so we're doing lots of planning ahead. So actually breeding seasons come around quite quickly. So that's actually quite a year-long process. So we actually will start the breeding season next August if they are going to breed in 2026. So in August 2025, we'll start to go out to the island, start to feed the Kākāpō to get them in good breeding condition. So that's we're planning towards that. At the moment, we're transferring Kākāpō between sites. So we have quite a lot of movement of Kākāpō to balance up the populations from a numbers point of view to make sure we have the right numbers on each island, but also from a genetic point of view to make sure we have the right genetic mix on each island. So that's going on at the moment. So we're doing quite a lot. I think we're moving something around about 65 to 69 Kākāpō over sort of a couple of years between the different sites. We're also rolling out a new transmitter system at the moment right now. So we've got new transmitters which have been designed by Department of Conservation's electronics team. So that's brand new. That will enable us to do be more hands-off, basically, to have to catch Kākāpō less often. Currently, we have to catch them once per year. But with the new transmitters, we can perhaps catch them as little as once every 3 or maybe even 4 years. We can turn them on and off remotely. There's a lot of really cool tech in there. So that's being rolled out at the moment too. So yeah, we're planning ahead for that breeding season. Doing quite a lot of analysis to try and understand the data that we have and things like Mangatautari, rolling out the new electronics. And yeah, so we're actually pretty flat out. Plus we've got a new site at Cole as well. So there's other new population as well, which we're looking at. And we're hopefully going to be releasing more Kākāpō onto that site in August or September.
Yeah, it strikes me that it's just like it's a rolling, changing challenge. Like since you've been on board, across the 10 years, you've had those wonderful 3 big breeding seasons. But that changes the game and you're just, continuing to adapt and change. How do you find that? What does it feel like to be dealing with this new challenge?
Yeah, it's fascinating actually just how much it changes. So when I came in 10 years ago, the process looked very different. My first breeding season, I went straight into a breeding season. We had 6 Kākāpō chicks that year, and that was kind of like pretty decent. And then later on, we were looking at breeding season where we had 73 just a few years later. So the scale has changed massively, and our reliance on the technology and the stepping back is something that's really changed. We're definitely going through a change in Kākāpō management at the moment. We're entering a new epoch of Kākāpō management. Since the late 90s, it's been this 20 years of intensive management, real hands-on, trying to make as many Kākāpō as possible. And now we're shifting more towards how can we not necessarily make as many, but we want to keep the productivity up, but we want to do it in a less intensive way. We're also a little bit mindful as well about what sort of Kākāpō we're making, the quality of the Kākāpō. And we know there's some indications, for example, that hand rearing of Kākāpō might reduce the fertility of the males. And so that sort of thing, trying to be as natural as possible, trying to let eggs hatch in nests as much as we can, trying to let mothers raise their own young as much as we can. So trying to put things back to a more natural state as much as possible, whilst still remembering that there are critically endangered species. There's only 247 left on the planet, so we can't go too far. So it's trying to strike that balance, which is actually really exciting, and it's quite cool to be able to do that with the use of the technology. Without the technology, it would be very, very hard to manage that process of stepping back and becoming less intensive.
Yeah, and things like Sanctuary Mountain Mangatautari trial, it strikes me that, there has to be that kind of intense watching and management in these initial years, but with the hope of at some stage you've learned all the lessons and then you're able to be hands off and the Kākāpō just do their own thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's totally it. We have to, when we do anything new, we have to monitor closely, like for the Kākāpō's sake, we don't want them to come to any harm, but also for the learning too. We want to learn as much as possible, but we cannot keep that intensity up. We don't want intensively managed Kākāpō populations. The new ones, we want to be less intensively managed than the main ones that we have down south on Penuaho and Anchor. So yeah, it's just about striking that balance. And, I'm kind of looking forward to the next stage of, one day we will release Kākāpō without transmitters on. Every single Kākāpō at the moment wears a transmitter. Every single Kākāpō has a name, but I can't wait till we have Kākāpō out there without names and without transmitters on, just doing their thing, and we don't really know where they are. That would be fantastic. So that's the dream for me.
That is a great dream. That is a great dream. For somebody who's been working with them for a decade, and, you know, like we've talked about, the majority of us never get to see a Kākāpō. What are they like? What's it like working with them?
They're kind of otherworldly. They really are. They really are a special bird. You know, I mean, they are a bird, but they're not a bird really. They're like a pretend bird. They're much more of a mammal than a bird in pretty much every way. But yeah, to be able to see them in their natural habitat is so special. Every time it never gets tiring. You know, every time you see one, it's always a special moment. And they have such characters as well. They really are different. Each individual is different. You really notice it with Kākāpō. Maybe that's a result of us having so few of them, and maybe it's, you know, true for a lot of species. But yeah, you really do notice that. And yeah, to see a Kākāpō just walking off into the bush or walking on a branch sort of thing, amazing camouflage, that wonderful smell that they have. And just their kind of the way that they walk, the way that they climb. Yeah, they're really very, very unusual birds. So yeah, it's kind of easy to fall in love with them. Plus, as a scientist, you know, they're so unusual. They do everything differently. Every time we study something about Kākāpō, they don't follow the rule book. They do everything different from other birds. So yeah, that's absolutely fascinating.
That was Doc Kākāpō Recovery Team member Dr. Andrew Digby. Sound engineering is by William Saunders, and this was made with recording assistance from Otago Access Radio. Catch you next week. Kia pai te wiki.